Hi guys, this is exciting for me because we're actually going to get into some really interesting stuff that I've never actually heard about much in when attending church or doing Bible studies before. Don't know if we're actually going to get to a lot of that stuff today, but I'm prepared all the way up to when the chariots are washed over with the sea in Exodus. So before anything, though, I did, once again, my little 10-minute snippet of doing language-related stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and do a bit of a slideshow, I guess you could say, of Hebrew letters today, and to describe the development of the language throughout the years in terms of pronunciation. So let me make sure I have it ready. I do, and here it goes. I'm just trying to do that. All right, so this letter here is, okay, now I'm using the modern shape of the letters. They did change quite drastically over years. We've already gone over that. This particular letter here, I'm just going to do the pronunciation of it. Think of British people, Cockney English, when they say better, they say ba. It's that closing of the throat. We do it also in English, I've got a new idea. It's that closing of the throat between vowels there, and in Hebrew, that's actually a written consonant. It actually has a consonantal value. In English, not so much. It's actually one of the sounds that we actually don't ever write in English. So it is interesting that Hebrew has that pronunciation, and it survived as that pronunciation throughout the ages, so it never really changed. This one, it sounds like, even in modern Hebrew, it has two pronunciations. One of them is like a regular B, like a ba, and the other one is like a va, like a V, where your lip is under your top teeth. Now, what this va sound came from a loosening of the ba sound. And originally, when it became like a fricative, which means like a vibration between something, so a va, like an actual V, is the vibration between the bottom lip and the teeth, but it was originally between the two lips. So it was originally like a va, which is my two lips. I don't even know if you can see what I'm doing here, but I'll just show you me for a second. So that letter became a va, and then over time the lip went below the teeth, and so it went from ba to va over the years. And it is interesting how you have the evolution of that there. And a lot of languages did that actually. Another example of that is Spanish, that actually went through that process. And then you also have ga here. Now, in modern Hebrew, you only have ga with this letter. But originally, this one also did soften in the middle of words, and it became a ga. So you have ga and ga. And in modern Hebrew, they don't do that anymore. It's only a G sound. This one is a da, like in a D. And in original Hebrew, in the biblical version of Hebrew, it had two pronunciations. It was a da and also a the, like a th the, a voiced version, like you would actually say the the, the. Modern Hebrew does not do that anymore. This is a ha, like a regular H sound. It only has that pronunciation. Unless it's used as a vowel letter, but I'm not even going to mention those. So if you're talking as a consonant, yeah, that is a ha. This one is like a W, a wa. In modern Hebrew, it's pronounced like a va. So notice all the way back to where the B one is in modern Hebrew, that can be pronounced as a va, and this one is also pronounced as a va. So there are there's merging happening in modern Hebrew. But in biblical Hebrew, those two letters were very distinct. So this is a wa, and then this is a za. And this letter here is an interesting one. It originally had two pronunciations. One of them is ha, ha, and the other one is la, la. Oh, sorry. So you have two. Once again, I'll do, and the other one is, there we go. The second one finally got there. It's hard for me to emulate. French has that pronunciation, like in the word être, but it's hard for me to begin a word with that sound. So it's a weird sound. So what happened in the biblical Hebrew that I'm studying, it only has one sound, which is so very quickly, very early on, the two sounds of this letter merged. So today in modern Hebrew, it's only pronounced like a sound, which is interesting because another letter has that sound. So once again, originally it was, then it was, another version of it was, there we go, got it. And then you have those two sounds merged into what I study, which is, and you also have the modern version, which is, and there's actually a reason for the differences, and that's really fascinating, and I'm not getting into it. So there we go. This one originally, and for a long time, was pronounced sol, sol, sol. It's like a T sound, but the tongue is cupped. And it's the Arabic actually has this sound today. So when you listen to Arabic, it's a very distinct sound that Arabic has. So when you think about it, you can definitely, if you think of people speaking Arabic, you can definitely even recall like them saying things like sol, sol. It's a very common sound in Semitic languages. In modern Hebrew, though, it's only pronounced like a T. It lost its cup, the tongue lost the cup shape that it has. Then you have ya, like a Y sound, ya. Then you have a ga, which is like a light K, and the alternate or the loosened form. So remember, the B can sound like a V, the G, like the ga, can become like a ra, and the ga can become a ha. So so in modern Hebrew, this letter and this letter are homophones. So this is an L, L. This is a M, an M. This is a N, an N. This is a Sa, like an S. This sound in modern Hebrew is exactly the same as the first letter. It's when you say like ba'a, ba'a in Cockney English, or when we say I got it, or something like that. In ancient Hebrew, and actually Arabic has this sound today. It's the la sound. So if I say nolam, or it's like I tighten my throat and then I release it. So it's the la sound, which is very hard for people to pronounce if they don't study it as their first language. So so that's why it actually lost that sound in modern Hebrew. Some speakers of Hebrew kept it, but it's mostly lost. This is like a P, but like a lesser form. It's like a F. And then you have remember when I said the two lips together? Originally, the softened form was like a H, which I'm making with my two lips together, but I'm almost staying in F. And then over time, actually very quickly, that sound of two lips together got lost, and the lip went under the teeth and became an F that we have today. F. And then you have this one. Today, it's pronounced sa, sa, like a TS, or like if they said the word it's going to be a good day, it's that sound. Originally, it was saw, saw, which once again is like that T with a cup. It's like an S with a cupped tongue. Saw, saw. And it's Arabic still has that today. This one is pronounced the same as the hardened version of this one. Wow, I have to go back a long way. There's a hardened version of this one. Remember, this is a ga sound, very similar. Its modern pronunciation is like a ga. Originally, it was a back of the throat type of a letter, and it was qa, qa. And then, actually, Arabic has that today. This one is like the French R, ra. Very often it's pronounced that way even in modern Hebrew, and it pretty much stayed pretty consistent over the years. This one has always had two distinct pronunciations. One of them is like a sha, like a shoe, and it remains such through the ages, sha. Then there's the second version, which actually was originally pronounced sha. It's like almost say an L, but allow the air and don't use any voice. It's just the air going through the two sides of the tongue. And it's sha, sha. Over time, though, that sha became lost and became an S, sa. So even around Jesus' time, this letter and this letter had similar sounds when it was both an S-like sound. And this one is a ta sound. In modern Hebrew, though, it's only ta. But in ancient Hebrew, it also became like a sa, like the sound in thing. So you can see the reason why I'm showing this is that the sound quite drastically changed over the millennia. And even by the time Jesus came around, certain sounds were already changing, such as this letter here, no longer being pronounced sha, but either sha or sa. Another one that changed by the time Jesus came around quite heavily was this one, which was no longer said with two lips together, except for fa. So it was not pronounced like it was only pronounced like a fa as well, meaning the F sound with the two lips together was lost. And the same thing is said with the bait here, is that the two lips together sound was lost when the two lips together sounding like a V sound was lost. Anyway, it's hard to explain. Another thing that changed by Jesus' time was this letter, which originally had two different pronunciations, had already merged. Oh, and I forgot to mention, the two distinct pronunciations for this one had already merged. It originally, I already told you that Arabic has the sound la. Another pronunciation for this was la, la. I forgot that one. But by the time Jesus came around, it was only la. So I'm showing you this for a reason. It's actually pretty important when it comes to later. I was like, Mom can actually attest. I was looking up the shibboleth thing going on here. And it actually has to do with this letter right here. And what the Ephraimites said was more than likely a traditional pronunciation based on the sha sound that we talked about already. Anyway, I'm showing you guys that for a reason. It was fun, and we will be coming back to that later. It definitely scratched my brain a little bit. I love talking about stuff like this.
Nerded out.
I did nerd out. The one reason why I'm talking about this is think of the word Abram, but it was always like a va sound when spoken. Actually, back when it was a va sound, but then when it came time to write it in Greek, they used the beta, and that became a va sound over time. But by the time it had reached Latin, they were only spelling that name with a B. And that's why we're having strange spelling differences when we're coming across certain names that change over the millennia. It's really cool when you get into the specifics of it, and it's really amazing to see how language indeed evolves throughout the thousands of years. And it's something that really excites me. I love historical linguistics. It's really cool to me. But by the time we get to Judges, hopefully we'll be understanding more about how certain sounds have changed even by then. So it was a pretty major thing. Anyway, so that's that. We left off in Genesis 41. And, oh, by the way, is there any question? If you guys, okay, how about this? If you guys have any questions, bump in there and stop me, because we'll have, I will definitely hear you, so just bump in. Anyway, we'll go ahead and start with chapter 41. And once again, I am taking a more of a step back when it comes to looking at detail. I'm just picking out certain points that I think are of interest. In 41:9, and when it says, finally the king's chief cupbearer spoke up, "Today I have been reminded of my failure," he told Pharaoh. It's interesting. I made the mention last week that he instantly forgot grace, but yet he remembered it when the time was right. I just wanted to make that point. It was pretty interesting to me. It really has no bearing on much of anything else, but it does remember that. He says, "Oh, I remember my failure." And there is a lot of mention of God remembering his people, but it's interesting that the cupbearer remembered this grace that was given him.
I was thinking when I read that it was what Joseph's response will be when he becomes the prime minister or whatever of Egypt. I wonder if Joseph will remember.
It's like, thanks for finally remembering me. Yeah, I like that. In verse 16, "It is beyond my power to do this," Joseph replied, "but God can tell you what it means and set you at ease." Do you remember what Joseph said about this? The interpretation only belongs to
God.
When it was talking about the dreams. Yeah, it only belongs to gods. It could be God or gods at this point, and that particular reference. Here, it's only singular. And I was looking at the grammar there. It's only singular. There are certain rules that you have to pay attention to, like grammatical rules. They're not necessarily set in stone, but it's like the pattern of the rules. And when there are certain places where you know a name is being said versus, oh, this could potentially mean God. And I thought that was an interesting point to bring up. In verse 33, so yeah, that particular mention is very singular in meaning. In verse 33, "Therefore, Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt." What is God's commission in the Garden of Eden? He tells people to
subdue the land.
First of all, yeah, to rule the land. And also, and the implication is also with godly wisdom and knowledge, intelligence. That wisdom and knowledge and that ability to rule. And what does Joseph do? We were talking about how Joseph has those Jesus-like qualities about him. And this is more evidence of that. He's able to rule over the entire land. And not only does he rule over it, he brings prosperity. And that's huge. 38 to 39. So Pharaoh asked his officials, "Can we find anyone else like this man so obviously filled with the Spirit of God?" It's interesting. Yeah, or if you look at it, I think it could also potentially mean filled with the Spirit of the gods. I'm checking here. Genesis 41, 38. I'm just checking the grammar here. No, it means God at singular. It's definitely the singular version, the Spirit of God. But he says, can we find anyone else like this man so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? There's a section I remember. Is there? Anyway. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are." And this is Pharaoh, who was considered like a godly person, like a god in his own right, and yet telling Joseph how intelligent and wise he is. I thought that was interesting that you have the story of the garden first, and then Genesis ends with the story of Joseph here. And it is interesting about the whole wisdom aspect. Verse 45. Then Pharaoh gave Joseph a new Egyptian name. Zaphenath-Paneah. Let me tell you something about this name. It's really confusing. My thing says it probably means God speaks and lives. Probably means that. But remember, too, it's like I've also heard something like there are so many potential meanings of this name, but it means something along the lines of what Joseph says is God speaking, and the people live as a result of it. Is the general idea of what's thought to mean that particular name. Think about this. We were talking about speaking and things coming to life back in Genesis 1. There's a weird thing happening here when we're looking at Joseph like being more like a Jesus figure. And the next verse after that, he also gave him a wife whose name was Asenath. She was the daughter of Potiphera, the priest of On. And what is it? Yep. Oh yeah. Okay. Cool. And there was something else. Hold on. Oh yeah. Oh, so Joseph took charge of the entire land of Egypt. Once again, it's talking about how all the land was under his command. In verse 49, he piled up huge amounts of grain. Huge amounts of what? Grain.
What?
What?
What did you ask?
He piled up huge amounts of grain. Do you remember what it was that what's the significance of grain when we were talking about grain before?
You're talking about the offering in the garden?
No, we were talking about like the seed-bearing plants.
Oh.
Yep. Okay. Your voice is very weak right now.
I'm sorry, I moved my mic. I moved my mic so I could drink my coffee.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, we were talking about seed-bearing plants. What is grain? Is it not a seed-bearing plant?
It's not?
No, is it not? Yeah. We're going back to garden-like imagery, and he had storehouses of grain, which are what the people were told to eat originally in Genesis 1.
It's interesting.
Anyway.
In my version here, it says Joseph gathered very much grain as the sand of the sea. I was going to talk about. Oh, sorry. I'll shut up.
No. What? No, please.
No, I was just saying that's what he promised Abraham, that his descendants would be the sand of the sea, like numbered.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. You're going to start to see weird repetitions of words in different combinations. So right now we're seeing a combination of words such as like the sand, that you can't count things. Read the next verse. So the next verse says, finally, the next part of right after it says standing on the seashore, finally he stopped keeping records because there was too much to measure. So there's a lot of play going on for the entire story of Genesis right now. So you have them storing grain, and then you have like the mention of sand on the seashore, and then you have the mention of it's too much, it's limitless, you can't count the number. And it's not only with grain that this happens, but this is interesting that they're going back to Eden mentality there, or Eden living. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add with that before, as I'm looking at my notes here?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So that's just a preview of what's going to happen in the next chapter. So chapter 42, verses 1 to 2.
Hold on a second. I think the Messiah image is interesting here too, because he brought salvation to Egypt and the surrounding lands.
Yep. Do you remember what Joseph's name means? He increased.
Yeah, I think it runs. It runs. His bounty flows over the walls, or something to that effect, when he was blessed by Jacob.
Exactly. Or you're right. And remember, like Rachel said, thank goodness I added a son, but like. Or something like plenty. We were talking about the potential of plenty.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It's interesting his meaning here. And it also is an interesting way of playing on. Think of Jesus' name. It means God saves. It's like, yeah, it's interesting that, anyway, there's a play there because Jesus means God saves, but Jesus is God. So yes is the answer there. So it's interesting that with Joseph's name as well, you have he increased, or he added, or he made plenty. And yeah, it's cool. Who did? Who made plenty?
God did.
Or Joseph did.
Oh,
the answer
okay.
is yes. And the same thing with Jesus' name. God saves, or Jesus saves. But he does save, but God saves. Yes. So that's the meaning of many of the names here that we're going to encounter. So there's an interesting play on Joseph's name. Also, is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Anything else as I get rid of everything here?
You were just talking about how God saves is Jesus' name. I just got just a little thing. When I used to live in Binghamton, New York, there was a big sign, neon sign that said "Jesus saves" as you drive down this one highway, and then as you make the bend, it's the Binghamton Savings Bank was right behind it, and so it was kind of like Jesus saves at the Binghamton Savings Bank.
I like that. Yep. Yeah, I do remember you telling me that when I was a kid. All right, anything else? Just jump in there like you did, Dad. Like that's how we're gonna roll, I think. So. Yeah, no, I said just like Dad did.
Oh,
just jump in there. Yeah. So yeah, when Jacob heard that grain was available in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why are you standing around looking at one another? I have heard that there is grain in Egypt." Interesting thing that he heard. Go down there and buy enough grain to keep us alive. Otherwise, we'll die. And it's I love how there's like an interesting play here because it goes, go there. I've heard that there's grain down there. Go and fetch it, or we will die. So it goes back to what Dad was saying is the whole interplay of wait a second, there was that mention of sand on the seashore, and yet there was that mention of plenty, and there was that mention of grain, and we're starting to mix the messages in a good way. It's bringing everything back together. So anyway, verses 17 to 18. So Joseph put them all in prison for 3 days. How long did he put his brothers in prison? 3 days.
3 weeks.
Interesting amount.
Right.
What?
Nothing
3 weeks.
so.
Yeah. Interesting amount of time, right? Just as much as Moses later on tells Pharaoh, let us go out for 3 days. Or it's interesting that we're comparing Joseph to Jesus here. And he puts his brothers in prison for 3 days.
Yeah, and what about the dreams that they had with the baker and the wine bearer, cupbearer?
3 days. What will happen
3
to
days.
you?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, you got it. Yes, this is interesting imagery here. So on the third day, Joseph said to them, "I am a God-fearing man. If you do as I say, if you listen to my voice, basically." I don't know if that's what the Hebrew says. Let me check. I'll check. I will check. Genesis. What is that? 42. 42:1.
42:18.
Thank you, because I'm reading like really small print right now, so it's hard for me to keep track of where I am.
Put your glasses on.
On the third day, do. It says it in more or less terms. Hold on. It basically says do. It's actually using kind of royal language here, but it's interesting. He just says do this and live. So it's interesting though, because my translation says if you do as I say, but this one says do it. But the implication is that they're listening.
In the New King James it says, "Do this and live, for I fear God."
That's basically what Hebrew does say that. Do this and live, but for I fear God. But when he says this, what do? They listen to him, and it is something that we've done before, that you don't actually have to have the explicit listening there. But it is, yeah, it's interesting. The language used here is very royal sounding. It's just do and live. Anyway. Okay. 22. Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? Reuben asked, but you wouldn't listen. And now we have to answer for his blood. And I remember this is making a playback on the Cain and Abel story. It's so interesting. It feels like everything's culminating here. It's like, oh, there's a reference to that, and 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 it's happening everywhere right now. In 28, look, he exclaimed to his brothers, my money has been returned. It's here in my sack. Then their hearts sank. Trembling, they said to each other, what has God done to us? It is funny because they don't recognize the good that's happening here, because they're instead being terrified at what's happening here. I think it's an interesting lesson as well when we think of like how certain things happen and we think that God's actually punishing us or something as crazy is happening, but really we can't see the behind the scenes things happening. It's really amazing. And this is just a prime example of this. They think that God's getting him back for killing Joseph, and instead they're actually being truly blessed by having enough money to survive, although that money does get returned later. But you understand what I'm saying. 36. Jacob exclaimed, you're robbing me of my children. Joseph is gone, Simeon is gone, and now you want to take Benjamin too. Everything is going against me. I thought it was interesting because once again, Jacob is bringing it back onto his honor and the things that he has and the things he wants to hold on to. And remember before we talked about this with the whole thing with Dinah, and he goes, you're bringing shame against my name. It's interesting here that Jacob is still the same old Jacob, and same thing is similar things are going on. I remember we were talking before, does Jacob actually really change his character? And the answer is pretty much no. He's still going the same way. So it's like he's basically saying it's mine, even with his children, mine. And then I guess you could also make a parallel with like how God is zealous about us, and also jealous. But like when you're talking about God, it's like, no, you are mine. You're not anyone else's. Anyway, that's a totally different thing. That's a rabbit hole.
I think it's interesting, Joel, in verse 37 where it says, Reuben spoke to his father saying, kill my two boys if I don't bring him back to you, and put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you. Change of attitude from when they got rid of Joseph back in the day.
Can you repeat the whole thing again? I just want to follow that one. I think I got it.
Basically, the attitudes of the brothers started changing here because they started realizing the guilt of what happened with Joseph.
Right. No, you're right. But I think what's interesting, though, is they thought, just like Cain did, that by killing him or selling him into slavery, that they would earn the things that Joseph had. Similar to like Cain, like getting rid of Abel because he was in his way, essentially.
Yeah, but it looks to me like there was some remorse or repentance here of what they did.
I would say so on the whole.
Yeah.
At least some, or that they were scared about what was happening. But I think they were scared, more or less scared. Just like with Adam and Eve, when they took of the fruit, they hid because they were afraid, and because they were afraid of the repercussions. And I think that's pretty evident here as well. You have a couple characters like Reuben and Judah, but I mean, pretty much they're just scared for their skin. So I don't have anything for 43. I mean, we all know this. Everyone here in this session currently knows the story. So if anyone has anything to add, just shoot in there like Dad has been doing, and we'll go from there. Or like Mom actually has been doing once, and then we'll keep going. In chapter 44, verses 33 to 34. So please, my lord, let me stay here as a slave instead of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. So who is this speaking here? Unless I'm wrong, it's Judah.
Yeah, right? Where are you? Where are you, Joe?
Chapter 44, verse 33, the last two verses of the chapter.
Okay.
So please, my lord, let me stay here as a slave instead of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. This is an intercession here. And it's interesting that you have an intercession happening in a very Jesus-like story. Not to mention it's Judah saying it. But anyway, for how can I return to my father if the boy is not with me? I couldn't bear to see the anguish this would cause my father. It's really interesting here. Think about like Jesus talking about the sheep, or like the anguish of like when they were talking about like the prodigal, right? The prodigal son, yeah, all that stuff. Like, let me step in and be a slave in place of this boy because I could not bear to see the anguish. And at that point, everyone thought Benjamin had done it because the cup was inside of the sack. But it is very interesting to compare that with the Jesus story. Very Jesus-like in this nature. Not to mention Jesus comes from Judah. So, all right, 45:8. So it was God who sent me here, not you. And he is the one who made me an advisor. My text here says, a father to Pharaoh, the manager of his entire palace and the governor of all Egypt. Now, wait a second. All right, stop. I have heard, and I think it's very potential, that because pharaohs were very often put on the throne at very young ages, that they could that this pharaoh looked at Joseph as a mentor of sorts. Not discounting that, but hear me out. So we're looking at Joseph as like a Jesus figure, and we're talking. What does it say? Where does it say that we've made only just slightly lesser than the angels, or that don't you know that you will judge angels? And it's stuff like that. And remember that Pharaoh is considered a god, and yet this God looks at Joseph like a father, like someone above him, like an advisor, someone that he himself looks up to. This is, and at the time this was written, I don't care if it's from just after the exile all the way back to the estimated dates that Moses lived. If you look at all of this, it's basically saying that Pharaoh, a god on earth, is looking at Joseph, a human being, as an advisor or as like a father. And this is like talking about like the plenty of Eden, and this is where it goes back to rule the earth and subdue it, and also the tying in of like how we are to be above the other Elohim at some point. And it's really interesting that whole concept. And it's kind of interesting how it plays out in this particular story. Oh, yes. Wait a second. Did I see here? Yeah, oh, yeah. And where it says, so it was God who sent me here, not you. And he is the one who sent me as like a father to Pharaoh. You know what's interesting here is another thing, too, is remember when we were talking about how Judah sold him into slavery. And if you're looking at Judas, was the one who sold out Jesus. And Jesus was basically talking about like how this was always in the Father's will. It goes back to, remember here, what Joseph is saying is that it wasn't necessarily anything that you did that sent me here. It was through the weaving of God's will that I was brought to this point. And it's interesting that there is a distinct parallel here. But anyway, 46:15. These were the sons of Leah and Jacob who were born in Padanaram. Oh, here we go. So they have like all the names of like sons and daughters here, and then how many? How many through Leah? Go ahead and shout it out when you see it. Don't care who.
What?
How in verse 15 of 46? How many people? Descendants. There's a number.
33.
33.
Yeah.
33. So remember, 3 is a very powerful number. And this is the beginning of the whole number. And this is where it gets really weird really fast. Okay, so just bear with me. Okay, so 33. You're talking about 3 days. Jonah, 3 days. In the wilderness, Moses asked Pharaoh. That means he let out 3 days. You've got to remember, 3 is a pretty big number here. I'm going to skip a little bit.
What about Jesus dying when he was 33?
Or for 3 days and 3 nights that he was dead, or for the potential of like the 30 years old that he was when he was, 3 is a pretty big number. And how it's said in Hebrew is 3:10:3. So that's how we get to 33. It's like 3:10:3. And so that's pretty clearly focusing on the number 3, like a doubling of 3. Then we have, bear with this one. The next one says 16. We'll come back to that. The next number after that that's mentioned verse 22. Under Rachel, it was 14, which is, we already talked about how important the number 14 is when we looked at Genesis, and we were looking at like how there's this one verse that has 14 words in it. And they knew that like that 7, or they didn't know, but they had that conceptualization of the importance of 7 plus 7. And then you also have the next one would be 25:7 under Bilhah. But strangely enough, under I want to make sure I say her name, Yazopha, it was 16, and that one confused me. Now, don't get me wrong; all of them add up to the number 70, but that's clear in and of itself. But why do you think 16 is major? I'm struggling with this one. So is there anything out there that you think is interesting about the number 16?
What verse is 16 in?
That would be in 18. So you have 33 plus 16 plus 14 plus 7 equals 70. So why 16?
Well,
it took me a while to start
4 squared.
Yeah, 4 squared, but what's the importance of 4?
4 corners of the earth? I don't know. I'm just throwing things out.
Stretching here.
How many
watches? Well, it's 8 times 2. How's that? Would that do anything for you?
That's it. He dealt with 3-3. Then we dealt with, it's definitely 3-3. We've also dealt with 7-7, like 7 plus 7. We've also dealt with just 7 itself, and now we're dealing with 8 plus 8. Now, how many watches are there throughout a day? 8. What day is circumcision? 8. How many sons did Abraham have? 8. He did.
No,
it had
14.
a list.
No, he had 14.
What?
He had Ishmael, he had Isaac, and then he had 12 by his last wife, Keturah.
6.
No, there was supposed to be 12 kings who were coming from her.
Yeah, 12 kings came from her, but they weren't all at once.
I thought she had 12 kids.
No, he had 8 total.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. I'll go back and check you up on you, though.
No, wait a second. Where does it mention it? Hold on.
It talks about after, before he died, he sent him away.
Yes. Wait a second. Yeah, from big to small. Ishmael, Isaac, Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. His sons. Then you have, Abraham's family tree. No, that's where it does that, but I'll check it. I'll check it for next week, but how many sons did Abraham have? 8. 8 sons, right there. The record of these sons are in the book of Genesis. He had Ishmael. Now it says the 12 sons of Abraham. But that was like, you're talking about like the 12 tribes by that point. But then it was talking about like how you gave, what was her name? Tamar? Yeah. But in all total, Abraham had 8 sons. I'm looking at various sources right now. Abraham had 8 sons. Abraham had, So 1 to Hagar, 1 to Sarah, and 6 to Keturah. So, yep. Yep. There are also 16 judges in the stories of the judges. There are 16 judges. And one other thing, too, is that Jesus appeared 8 times after his resurrection. It's really interesting. And I never really knew of the concept or the importance of 8 before. And there are, I can, if you get involved in numerology, and I'll just mention it, I think it's potentially, I personally think it's a stretch, but if you're looking at numerology, the number 8 is seen as like God's love. Especially 16 is like God's infinite love. But I personally, that type of conceptualization came much later. And one other thing is, we were looking at the letters before. My name in Hebrew begins with the Yah letter and with the Wa letter, which is one of the ways to spell God's name. And if you look at the numerical value, it adds up to 16. And because you have the way that they did numbers back then, and this is why I have a problem with that as well, is the way that you could use a Hebrew letter to denote a number didn't come into place until about the time of the Maccabees. So to me, it's kind of a stretch to say that having 16 descendants under it's Zilpah, right? Zilpah.
I don't.
But
I'm just saying the numbers are interesting sometimes, and sometimes they're meaningful in the Bible. But when you go to the extremes, I don't think you're. I think you're a bit much.
This is what I'm saying. Personally, that's why I'm telling you why I don't believe that the number 16 here is reminiscent of a way to spell God's name.
Yeah, well, what I'm wondering is if these are just happen to be the numbers that came in and they were just recording them. How does that relate to anything in this case?
I will tell you why I doubt it. This is absolutely why I doubt it. It's too coincidental. Like you're like, this is the thing though. It's like there are other like sons and like there's a rounding of numbers very often here, and this will often happen. It's like there is like you can tell that when you get into it, you can tell that there's like a tweaking of the numbers. If you count the sons, you have 8 under Asher, and you have 8 under. It's like 8 men under Asher and 8 men under Gad. Like that's there. It's not saying that, but what I'm trying to say is, Hebrew has no problem, or the ancients had no problem twisting numbers in order to get the results they wanted. And this one having 70 descendants is huge. they absolutely like did something there because of the 70 days of the process of mourning. There is that discussion on how long it took the mummies to get mummified, but like it's back on the number 70. Things that there's also a debate on 70 and 70. I can't even get into it right now. Just trust me on this. It's not just here. There are roundings of numbers, and it was intentionally done.
Yeah,
so
I don't disagree with that, and I think it was just to make a point in the narrative and stuff. Like the 70 here might have something to do with the 70 elders in Israel. Later on, there were 70 elders, and maybe there is some correlation.
Oh yeah, the number 70 has a huge and intense meaning. Same thing with 40. Same thing with 50. Same thing with 49. Same thing. It's weird. So the numbers do have meaning. Going back to why I was having an issue with the number 16 was to say that 16 signifies love, I think is a stretch. But there is evidence when it comes to 8 being of some importance, although I still have yet to find that. Now, if someone brings up like a meaning of 8 to me that seems like going to increase, I would love to use it. But it is clear that 8 signifies the 8th day of circumcision. It also signifies like how many 16 is how many judges were around. Then you have like the 8 watches, the 8 sons of Abraham. It's interesting that. So that took a while, but it is interesting that we have 33, you have 14, you have 7, and you have 16, which has a debatable meaning. But yeah, that is interesting to me. 25. Oh yeah, so 26 and 27. The total number of Jacob's direct descendants who went with him to Egypt, not counting his sons' wives, was 66, which is very interesting there. And we've already talked about the importance of 6, like on the 6th day, man. That's another thing about Zilpha's son's potential having to do with the number 6, but it's potential, but I think it's more like 2 times 8 because of the 2 times 7 that got to 14. Anyway, but 6 is important because of the 6th day of creation. That's a huge theme as well. Not counting his sons' wives was 66. In addition, Joseph had 2 sons who were born in Egypt. So altogether, there were 70 members of Jacob's family in the land of Egypt. 66 plus 2 doesn't equal 70.
What about the 2 kids of Joseph?
Did it not just say Joseph had 2 sons who were born in Egypt? So what is 66 plus 2?
8, but who are the 2?
It was Ephraim and Manasseh.
And then Joseph?
Oh, no, but remember, it's included, yeah. So it was, if you included just, then you have 69. Plus Jacob himself, then that's where you can get 70. But there was like, anyway, 627. The original Greek reads 9 sons. So, probably including Joseph's grandsons through Ephraim and Manasseh. And when it says 70 members, the Greek version reads 75. So it's interesting that there's a weird. Remember, we're talking about the rounding of numbers. They were doing it back when the Greek translation was being formed as well. There is a distinct discrepancy here. But the thing is, though, the point is the number 70. The whole point was, it was making a symbol of the number 70. And I think it's interesting that we talked about that because there is a distinction of numbers there because I personally believe, and there's more than just me saying this, there's a lot of people saying this, that they were trying to get to a nice round number of 70.
Right. But if you take the 75 of this Greek translation, then that might have included the wives. And the concubines.
No, it said 9 sons. It said that Joseph had 9 sons.
9 sons?
Mm-hmm.
Really? I thought he only had 2.
66 plus 9 equals 75.
So the Greeks who the Septuagint said that Joseph had 9 sons, but not the Hebrew.
Yes. No.
That's weird. I didn't know that.
So it's weird, and to me it's evidence of number play, and which is cool because you can see a human hand in this, which is not anti-biblical. Like I think there's a problem with people there is a lot of human element in it, and I think it's nice that things are being brought to the number 70. Because think about it, if the Greek version says 66 plus 9 equals 75, but the Hebrew version says 66 plus 2 is 70. That's interesting to me. But that's really interesting. But anyway, which potentially could also include Joseph and Jacob, but still, come on. It's interesting because it says these are the members of Jacob's family, but if you have Joseph in there, that would only make 69, but it's nice around 70. That's enough of that, though. But I think you understand what I'm saying. It's an interesting game being played. So, okay. 27? Okay, yeah. 34. You must tell them, we, your servants, have raised livestock all our lives, as our ancestors have always done. When you tell them this, he will let you live here in the region of Goshen, for the Egyptians despise shepherds. It's interesting that they despise shepherds. And we're talking about the correlation between the Joseph story and the Jesus story. So how the Egyptians despise shepherds. Look into that what you will. But I thought you were saying something. It's hard. It's weird. For clarification purposes, for anyone watching or anyone attending, I am deaf in my left ear, so it's hard for me to tell a distinction of sound sometimes. So yeah, that's why I always jump around like that. Anyway, alrighty. Chapter 48, verse 10. 48? Yes. Oh no. Oh, we did have 47 notes. Okay. I thought I skipped another one. All right, verse 20.
I have some notes for 47.
Oh, please go first, and then we'll talk about it.
Okay, we were talking numbers?
Yes.
Well, I knew this from before. I studied this out before, but while we're sitting here, I was checking numbers. Unless they rounded the numbers and they were incorrect, but if you go by the numbers and ages that we're given, if you go to 41 verse 46, Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He was 17 when he went down into Egypt, so that's 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
And when he told his brothers to bring his father into Egypt, he said there's still 5 years of famine. So it had been 9 years since the start of plenty,
mm-hmm.
so that he would be 39 years old. And when Jacob got down there, he would have been 32 or 30, 32
42 or 43.
Yeah, and I mean 32 or 33. I lost my train of thought. 17, 29. Yeah, he might have been. It might have been 30 years that he'd been in Egypt at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So, because it was 29 years when he talked to his brothers. And maybe by the time Jacob got down there, another year slid by,
mm-hmm.
or close to. So that would be 30 years that Joseph was in Egypt. When Jacob talked to Pharaoh, he told Pharaoh he was 130 years
mm-hmm.
old. So let's say that was 30 years that Jacob had been in Egypt. If you take that 30 years from Jacob's life, his age, that would be 100. Isaac died when he was 180 years old, and Jacob was born when Isaac was 60.
Yeah. So he would have been.
So add 100 years to 60, would have been 160 years old. So
who would have been 160
wait a minute.
years old? No.
No. I'm talking about Isaac. He was 60 years old when Jacob was born.
Mm-hmm.
So add 100 years to that.
It would have been
160. So 20 years, that doesn't quite add up. But anyhow, with the calculation, Isaac was alive when Joseph was taken into Egypt.
Yeah, there was also discussion too about how Abraham was alive when Noah was alive.
Yeah. Yeah, but Isaac would have been alive, and it looks like if you just say it was 29 years that he was there, at the 29th year, he probably died when Joseph was in prison just before he was taken out to Pharaoh. So he probably died just before Joseph was in Pharaoh.
Yeah. According to the biblical record, that would have fallen in line that way. Yeah.
I thought that was interesting. But if those years are accurate, the ages are accurate. If they're accurate, then he would have been alive when Joseph was sent to Egypt.
Mm-hmm. No, I see that. According to the biblical record, yes.
Mm-hmm.
We did. Yeah, I'm thinking about Noah and Abraham. That Noah would have still been alive when Abraham was born. But anything else before we go on? Oh, I like that.
Oh, that's where I messed up. It would have been 23 years that Joseph was in Egypt, not 30. 23 years he was in Egypt when Jacob came down. So you take that off. It makes Isaac 168 years old when Joseph went into Egypt.
And how old was Isaac when he died?
180. Yeah, so Joseph would have been in prison.
Right, almost the time when he came out of
prison. Almost. Right. Yeah. I screwed up there. It was 23, not 30. Yeah, 23 years.
When you think about Isaac's name, meaning he laughed versus he laughed and he added. That is interesting too. That's an interesting addition to it. I like that. I do like that. I would have to ponder that more. All right, verse 20 and 21. I'm just going to read it, and then we're going to react. So Joseph so remember, he created an Eden of sorts with God's help. God's spirit was in him. There was an Eden. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. All the Egyptians sold him their field because the famine was so severe, and soon all the land belonged to Pharaoh. As for the people, he made them all slaves from one end of Egypt to the other. I'm just checking here what this is. In the Greek, this is what the Greek says, is that he made them all slaves. But in Hebrew, it says he moved them into towns. But essentially, the towns would have been kind of like barracks for slaves. So we made an Eden, and yet Joseph bought everything, and then subjugated the Egyptian people under the Pharaoh. So failure happens here. He subjugates people, and that is not seen as good. But to him, it seemed as good because it added to his wealth. And it's funny because it's give us food or we will die. He could have just given them food, but he doesn't. He doesn't provide them with plenty. Instead, he buys everything from them.
Is there a correlation there between Esau and Jacob?
Also.
Give me the pottage or I'll die. I die.
I never even thought of that. That's a big one. Yeah, I will die unless you give me food. Yep. And then you tell me your birthright. And essentially that's what happens when the Egyptians sell everything to Joseph. Yeah. Huh. Joseph, like father, like son.
I don't think he was really dying. I think it was kind of a, I'm just dying here. Why?
The inference says he was famished.
Really? He said, what good will it do me if I die?
Right, and that's the same thing that you have with the Egyptians saying, we're going to die unless you give us food. Well, that was a perfect correlation. I never even thought of that, but yet, beans. It seems coming back. Anyway. 25 to 29. You have saved our lives, they exclaimed. May it please you, my lord, to let us be Pharaoh's servants. Joseph then issued a decree still in effect in the land of Egypt, that Pharaoh should receive 1/5, 20% instead of 1/10 that God asks for. God doesn't ask for too much, but yet Pharaoh gets 20. Of all the crops grown on his land, only the land belonging to the priest was not given to Pharaoh. Similar to like with the Levites. And meanwhile, the people of Israel settled in the region of Goshen in Egypt. There they acquired property, and they were fruitful. And their population grew rapidly. Jacob lived for 17, so 7 and 10 years after his arrival in Egypt. He lived 147 years in total. And we're talking about like 14 and 7, and like the doubling of 7 to make 14. And now we have 147. And it's interesting. As the time of his death drew near, Jacob calls for his son Joseph and said, "Please do me this favor. Put your hand under my thigh." So remember, this is a deathbed oath. "And swear that you will treat me with unfailing love by honoring this last request. Do not bury me in Egypt." That's it. Yeah, when I die, please take my body out of Egypt and bury me with my ancestors. I'll do that. Honestly, I'm not going to get really much into that, but yeah, it's interesting how he wants to go back to the same place that his forefathers were buried in. But all right, so 48 verse 10. I'm trying to get to a certain point before we're almost there, and then we'll just take a quick break. Verse 10. Jacob was half blind. We talked about Isaac being blind, and now Jacob is half blind because of his age and could hardly see. So Joseph brought the boys close to him, and Jacob kissed and embraced them. I thought it was interesting that he could hardly see. And then in verse 19. But his father refused. "I know, my son, I know," he replied, "but Manasseh will also become a great people, but his younger brother will become even greater, and his descendants will become a multitude of nations." So it's like, it's against the norm. So him listing the younger son as the one that would overtake the older son, that's against the norm. Oh, and it's also reminiscent of Jacob and Esau. So like here is Jacob doing the same thing with it in a sense. But this time he knows what he's doing versus Isaac being tricked into doing so. But it is going against like the norm and the cultural backdrop. So it's interesting how God works through that. In verse 22, "And beyond what I have given your brothers, I'm giving you an extra portion of the land that I took from the Amorites with my sword and bow." Please tell me what battle that is. Please tell me. Any takers? There is no mention.
Oh, makes sense.
It doesn't exist. In the Hebrew account, there is no mention of him taking anything from the Amorites. It's potential that when it was talking about Shechem. But remember, he didn't participate in that. He said, "You're bringing dishonor upon my name." Potential that's what that's referring to, but it's not necessarily so. And not to mention too that what was it? Something about a coat. I think there was like an interplay too that Shechem can also mean something like it means like the ridge of something, and which also comes from like the hem of something. It's something weird about that with a potential wordplay. And it's also potential because with there's potential of like future mention of like the verb form could potentially mean the future conquest of someone. And with the sword and the bow, he obviously didn't use his own sword and bow when it came with Shechem. And so there's a weird thing going on here because there is no mention of it in explicit detail. It's an interesting statement and no one really knows the meaning. So it's really cool. 49, verses 8 to 12. Oh yeah, if you read his entire blessings to his sons, they really don't sound like blessings. But anyway, but with Judah, you have, Judah, your brothers will praise you. You will grasp your enemies by the neck. Notice it's by the neck, not by the foot. All your relatives will bow before you. Judah, my son, is a young lion that has finished eating its prey. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness, who dares to rouse him. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from his descendants, until the coming of the one to whom it belongs, the one whom all nations will honor. He ties his wait, is it to the 10th, did I say? No, to 12. Okay. He ties his foal to a grapevine, the colt of his donkey to a choice vine. He washes his clothes in wine. His robes are in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. There's a lot that can be said there. I don't even think that we have to go into that. There's a lot of interplay. Not to mention Hebrew poetry, which there's a lot of parallelism. So it's talking about like the grapevine, and then it's like next time talking about the wine that's pouring, and it's really cool stuff. And of course talking about the scepter of ruling. And it's yeah, there's also debate too that this was interjected later, like when he comes down to David's line, that like you got Scribes that went in there and added section talking about how it came through Judah. There's debate. There really is debate when it comes to that, but it is interesting that Judah is like one of the positive sections that we come across here. Relatively positive, because when you think about it, God doesn't like the idea of like a lioness crouching and waiting to. It's not God's ideal. But it is interesting that Judah has a relatively positive blessing there. I would not want to be one of the other sons that get Jacob's blessing, though. So that's 8 to 12. Verse 28. These are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said as he told his sons goodbye. I love it. I love it. It's like cool. Have a nice one. A lot of you are going to be deceitful and not really do well, and have a good time with that. Peace out. Anyway, so he blessed each one with an appropriate message. It's really funny when you read them. It's like just like a weird one. Reuben, you're my firstborn, my strength, the child of my vigorous youth. You're the first in rank and first in power, but you're as unruly as a flood. And you will be the first no longer. So
Reuben had a history.
Oh, yeah, but not even that. Let's go to another one. Zebulun will settle by the seashore and will be a harbor for ships. Okay, that's okay. And then, yeah. Dan will govern his people like any other tribe in Israel. Dan will be a snake beside the road, a poisonous viper along the path that bites the horse's hooves, so its rider is thrown off. I trust in you for salvation, O Lord.
Yeah, Issachar's going to be a band of slaves.
Yeah, right. Kind of fall to burden. Dad will be attacked by marauding bands. I mean, come on! It's like they gave each of them an appropriate message. So anyway, that's 49.
What I think is interesting. Other than like Judah got 1, 2, 3, 4 verses of blessing, but not might be kind. No, Joseph's still bigger.
Joseph is bigger.
Joseph is still bigger. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 verses, but they're long.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
A blessing. I mean, compared to the other ones.
The other ones are like relatively short.
Yeah, kind of like
Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns.
Yeah, it's just offhanded, but he Joseph and he writes the book.
Yep, it is interesting. I'm not gonna lie about that one. It is interesting that Judah and Joseph got those two big sections. Anyway, chapter 50, last one, and then we'll take a break. Verse 3. The embalming process took the usual 40 days. And the Egyptians mourned his death for 70 days. So, talking about like embalming, like the mummification process, it was something like 72 days for the process to be done. But come on, 40 days and 70 days. That's a very interesting amount of time. Anyway.
But I do think
how long was Joseph alive?
Wasn't 70 days the standard period of mourning for Egyptian royalty?
The embalming process took that amount of time usually.
Yeah.
And unless I'm wrong, it might have been like a month, but I remember reading when I was a kid that was like 70 days. But the thing is though, how old was Joseph when he died?
110.
What's 40 plus 70?
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, so I don't know what the meanings are really getting at here, but to me it's clear that when you put 40 and 70 together, you get 110, which is just as long as Joseph lived when it comes to years. It's weird when you're starting to think that way. Verse 11. The local residents, the Canaanites, watched the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad. Then they renamed that place, which is near the Jordan, Oven Chaim. Which is the mourning of the Egyptian. It's funny, Ovel Michaim. That means, it does mean the mourning of the Egyptians. It's funny that, were these really Egyptians that were mourning there that day, that time?
It may have looked like it to the Canaanites.
It may have looked like it to the Canaanites, but what's interesting is that it's basically saying that Israel is getting sucked into Egypt. This is the really beginning. Oh, it's so cool because we're going to start talking about like what Egypt means. So that quickly they were being absorbed by Egypt. Then you have verse 20. You intended to harm me. We already talked about this. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for all for good. He brought me into this position so I could save the lives of many people. Think of comparisons to Jesus here. Anyway, so verse 24, soon I will die, Joseph told his brothers, but God will surely come to help you and lead you out of this land of Egypt. He will bring you back to the land he solemnly promised to give Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And I just think that's a really cool way to end it, and that's how we do lead into it. Exodus talks about that. I do need a break real quick, but crazy that we just did finish Genesis and that we are entering Exodus. And if you think the number play was crazy in Genesis, just you wait until the number play in Exodus. So, all right. So I will. I'm going to put this on off the record for a moment, and I'm going to take a break. So, actually, all right. So we're back, and pardon me. Okay. I'm going to kind of briefly mention mythology again. Oh, no, I ruined it. Creation stories. Sorry. But, I fell into my own trap. Yeah, but you know what I'm saying. I do want to share a couple of really cool things with you guys. So, I want to talk about this guy. It's coming. It's loading, I think. Potentially. I hope. Maybe not. We'll see.
Come on.
Well, I'll do this one first. Come on, Vicky. Karna. So does anyone know who Karna is? Just by the oh, there we go. There's Karna. This guy. Can you guess what religion he's part of? Hindu. Yeah, Hinduism. Yeah. There is an interesting story about his birth. I wonder what it has to do with. So his mom was impregnated by the sun god. And it's interesting when you compare here. So the mother was a virgin and was impregnated by a sun god. And so she got scared So she put him in a basket and let him drift away. And a charioteer of a low caste, although he was under a king, a charioteer found him, and he gave him away to Karna. He gave Karna away to a master of martial arts, and he became highly skilled in war, and he became a great warrior. That's a very common story in the ancient world, and that was it was pretty old. These three are relatively around the same time. Even the fourth one is relatively around the same time of the first extant instances of when we know about them. So that's Karna, right? You have this guy as well. His name was Sargon, Sargon the Great, and he and I'll read something from one of the tablets that is still extant. I believe it's also in the Louvre, this particular reading. Sargon the mighty king, the king of Agade, or Akkad, or Acadia, am I. My mother was lowly, my father I knew not, and the brother of my father dwelleth in the mountains. My city is Azupiranu, which lieth on the bank of the Euphrates. My lowly mother conceived me, in secret she brought me forth. She set me in a basket of rushes. With bitumen she closed my door. And she cast me into the river, which rose not over me. The river bore me up. Onto Aki the irrigator it carried me. Aki the irrigator and then there's a section missing, lifted me out. Aki the irrigator has his own son, another section is missing, reared me. And it's interesting that you have like a story just like this talking about, yet again, a mighty warrior. And then you got this guy, Oedipus, the baby here. And this is a shepherd who, now Oedipus, there are many, many origin stories of this guy. And it's in Greek mythology. Oh, sorry, sorry, I keep flipping today. And Oedipus, in one of the stories, was conceived and was put into a basket, and a rod was shoved between his feet. And essentially, the child died, and this shepherd revived the dead child. And it's a very interesting depiction here. But in Oedipus, we also know Oedipus from the Oedipus complex, that like fell in love with his mother, blah, 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 blah. But it's interesting that he also was inside of a basket and had flowed down the water. Flowed down the water. So we got those three stories there. And we have Moses, which is interesting. Moses is not the only religious character that was carried down safely in the water, although Oedipus died, but then the shepherd revived him. It's interesting that it's the shepherd, but anyway. So that's that. Now, we're about to enter Exodus. And before we do, and by the way, the reason why Oedipus was put inside the basket was it was foretold that he would kill a king. And so they essentially, kind of like with Moses, that he was put away in secret in order to protect him, although he died and he got revived. Anyway, it's an interesting story. Now, Exodus. So far, I'm only, preparing for this gathering, I'm only 15 chapters in, okay? But I'm psyching myself up because a lot of interesting play in numbers is happening, like number play is happening here. I'm going to pose a few questions. We're talking about Genesis before. Genesis has 50 chapters. I was just talking about before we started here. That it's interesting that the year of Jubilee, and it's also the 50th year is a Jubilee year. And I don't know if that really has much of any connection with Genesis, but it does have the narrative of Eden, right? How many chapters does Exodus have? 40. How many years in the wilderness were they?
50.
Right? So we're talking about the number of years in the number of chapters, and it's really interesting how like Genesis began and ended with like an Eden-like narrative.
Who made the chapters? Who divided the chapters?
Well, it had to be Moses.
They were numbered at a later. Even the Jewish version of the chaptering and numbering is not always in line with the Christian version of it. But that numbering system began about the time of the exile. So that it's interesting that there's a lot of similarities there. And yeah, 50 chapters are in Genesis and 40 chapters are in Exodus. What happens in chapter 12 of Exodus? If you can think off the top of your head, you don't even have to look it up. What happens in chapter 12?
I'm thinking, isn't that the Passover?
It is, isn't it? How many tribes are there?
14.
All right. And so 12 and 12, what happens in chapter 24?
Isn't that after the Ten Commandments were given and they went down from the mountain?
And Israel accepted the Ten Commandments. It's chapter 24 when Israel said, yes, we will follow.
Okay.
And then what happens in chapter 36?
I'll have to go there.
Tabernacle is being built. So it's interesting that, like, you have all these laws that are in the middle of it, but it just so happens that chapter 12 is the Passover, 24 is when Israel says yes, and 36 is when the tabernacle, God's dwelling, is being built. And it's really fascinating when you look at it that way. That is just a minor preview of coming attractions with the number play that happens in Exodus. It's expansive. I really had to like stop myself a couple of times and say, oh wait, this is going too far. Because like I don't want to jump all the way down the numerology path. But it is interesting how numbers really have a play here. So I think that's fascinating to me. So let's go ahead here and go straight into Exodus 1, verse 7. So let's start at verse 7. But their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. So we're talking about how 7 is like that plentiful. And here in verse 7, they had many children and grandchildren. In fact, they multiplied so greatly that they became extremely powerful and filled the land. I wonder what God told people to do in Genesis 1 as well. So it's interesting. There's interesting plays going around with the number 7 here. Verses 8 to 10. Eventually a new king came to power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. He said to his people, look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us, and they will escape from the country. So this is the beginning of Pharaoh being depicted as someone who, for his own self, is choosing good and bad, what is good in his own eyes. And this is a constant play all the way through that story. So, in chapter 2, verses 2 to 3, 2 to 3. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was a special baby and kept him hidden for 3 months. Anyway, but when she could no longer hide him, she got a basket made of papyrus reeds and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. She put the baby in the basket and laid it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. Now, the word for basket is exactly the same word in Hebrew that is used for the ark that transported Noah and his family. And remember, that word means a vessel that doesn't have oars, that the water transports, and that God directs. It doesn't have, the person inside has no direct control on where it goes. And that's the same thing that happened with the ark that Noah was transported in. In verse 10, Later, when the boy was older, his mother brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own son. The princess named him Moses, for she explained, I lifted him out of the water. I'm just going to say that there is a debate on what the meaning of Moses is. It's potentially a more than likely a folk etymology, which just basically means like the word for drawing out sounds similar to it, but the actual root doesn't seem to be. It seems if you're looking into Egyptian, it's something having to do with like I forget exactly what it is, but there is actually like a lot of research has gone on to this name, and it doesn't seem to necessarily mean drawing out, but we've already looked at names before that don't have that original meaning, but have been given that meaning through the Bible. And that happens all the time in languages. It really does. So the Bible's nothing special here in that regard. But it is interesting how, once again, we're talking about how the editors kind of like make comments to like link things together purposefully, and I believe this is similar when it comes to Moses' name. Anyway. So, verses 11 to 12, I just all of a sudden skipped 5 chapters because my pages are super tiny. So many years later, when Moses had grown up, he went out to visit his own people, the Hebrews, and he saw how hard they were forced to work. So he saw it. During his visit, he saw, and he just said twice, he saw an Egyptian beating one of his fellow Hebrews. After looking in all directions to make sure no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian and hid the body in the sand. So, and so he sees and he kills. Remember Cain and Abel. Remember Eve and the fruit. Remember, like, he's paying attention to what he sees. And so it's interesting here. The man replied, verse 14. The man replied, who appointed you to be our prince and judge? Remember we were talking about who was it that said that? Oh yeah, the plot, the people in Sodom and Gomorrah. Was it Sodom, right? That said, who made you our judge? Are you going to kill me like you killed that Egyptian yesterday? So it's interesting. By the way, notice that we're stopping on weird verses as we're doing this. So in verse 12, we're talking about after he looked in all directions to make sure no one and killed someone, and then in verse 14, that they said, "Who made you our judge?" Anyway, 18. When the girls returned to rule their father, he asked, "Why are you back so soon today?" And wait, this is not 8. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped a chapter. I'm sorry. Never mind. I'm sorry. That was not the one I wanted there. Oh, yeah. Verse 17. Sorry. But some other shepherds came and chased them away. So Moses jumped up and rescued the girls from the shepherds. Then he drew water for their flocks. Interesting that the one who was drawn from water drew water from their flocks. Parallelism. But anyway, another thing, too, is that shepherds are usually depicted as relatively good in biblical narrative, and here he actually drove them away, which is interesting, and it's kind of against what you would normally think. I just wanted to make that comment as well. Okay, so chapter 3. What happens in chapter 3? Very interesting thing happens in chapter 3. It's interesting, too, that it's in chapter 3. So, this is when the Lord appears. And this is really cool stuff. It's funny because Lydia would definitely remember, like, how just a couple weeks ago, Rusty was talking about, like, the importance of the bush here. Here we go. So, okay, we'll just do 1 to 6. So, one day, Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, which, if you dig a little bit, Sinai and the word for burning seem to have some sort of correlation. So burning and Sinai, somewhat similar. although it's potentially a false etymology, but there's been a lot of research on that. The mountain of God. Oh, we got to stop there for a second and talk about the Garden of Eden versus the mountain of God. So we have the Garden of Eden is seen as like the place where heaven and earth come together. Another thing, too, is the concept of a mountain. Remember in the Tower of Babel that they said, let us make something that reaches up to the heaven. The concept of mountains is that the higher up you go, the closer to the heavens you get. So the godly domain. And very true across basically all cultures. And so I remember when Tim Mackey called this thing the cosmic mountain, which is very common. You have Mount Olympus. In Greek religion, you have so Mount Olympus. You have there's like basically every major mountain in China has a temple on the top of it. A very common theme. Another common theme in Mesopotamian religions is the concept of a garden, which is like an oasis in the middle of a desert or an arid land, and which is basically talking about God's plenty and or the God's plenty. So Eden and a godly mountain are very much put on a parallel playing field when you're talking about imagery. And yeah, so you have and it's not just me saying this. There is, I would say, it's hard to basically find a way around that. It's really very clear that Eden and Mount Sinai are very much put on a parallel plane, which we'll get to later. Remember, like with Moses, he comes down with a glowing face. Wait a second, we're talking about Joseph being like a Jesus character. How about Moses becoming God himself? And the reason that is because we'll come to that later. But Moses, in a sense, becomes like the Israelites' way of looking at God in the face. Because remember, God says, I will make you like a god before Pharaoh, and Aaron will be your prophet. It's interesting, and we'll get into that later. It's not, please understand me, that I do not believe what I am saying right now is heresy in any way, shape, or form. We're getting all the way, so we already had Joseph as like a Jesus-like character, and then you have Moses, who is portrayed as like God's representative. And then you have God's representative in a way that God basically makes Moses into a god, for lack of a better term. I think you understand what I'm saying. And then you have David, which is an actual king, and then you have all the way down the line you have Jesus, who is God in the flesh. So it's interesting that you have these different variants here, but then you have Jesus, who is the pinnacle of that. Anyway, and not to mention, too, Jesus was hung on a hill of sorts. So it's interesting that we're going back to that mountain imagery, but yet he was hung on a tree, which is a combination of Eden and the mountain. Anyway, there's a lot of symbolism here. So, all that said, so he was on Sinai. There, the angel of the Lord, which is one of God's attributes, as we covered before, appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. So, we just talked about Jesus getting, that's a terrible thing to dance to, but like, you know what I mean, is that Jesus was nailed to a piece of wood. And here you have this bush, like a tree of sorts, like a giant, like, what do they call those things? Like, you have those, like, bush things in arid regions, in wilderness regions that look like trees, and it was consumed in some sort of fire. But it wasn't being consumed, if you understand what I'm saying. It wasn't actually getting burned up, which, once again, we were talking about God's presence as a fire. He's on the mountain that has potential cognate to the word for burning. It's interesting that there's a tree there reminiscent of the Garden of Eden, that the fire is not consuming that tree because, in a sense, that imagery of the tree of life is everlasting, and that so much things there. And then if you look at it the line with Jesus, it's like when that we'll get there eventually, but we have talked about this before in smaller group sessions. But essentially, we as Christians become similar to pre-becoming attraction. We become similar to burning bushes. in a sense, because that fire that lives within us does not destroy us. Instead, it brings us new life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So Moses comes across this tree that's not being consumed. So of course, this presence is that of God. And so there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of the bush. Moses stared. He looked at it in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. This is amazing. Moses said to himself, why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see it. It's interesting that he stops what he is about to say. When the Lord, he stops what he's doing and turns around. Now, it's interesting that the word being used here is not the same word for repentance, because repentance is a 180. But the word is different, but it is important that he was going one way. He sees this thing, and he starts going another way. There's a very powerful image that will come back in future things. But anyway, so when the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses. I wonder what Moses said. Here I am. Moses replied, do not come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you're standing on holy ground. I am, so essentially he's in the garden. I am the God of your father. What is it? Or of your fathers. In the Greek version it says your fathers, in the Hebrew it just says of your father, which is common. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. So remember, we're going back to the Garden of Eden imagery. It's like how they're afraid to gaze upon him. Or same thing happened with Jacob, that he looked at God and lived. But yeah, that's it's coming. So, verse 7, then the Lord told him, so this is verse 7 of chapter 3. I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress, of their because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. It's interesting that this is verse 7 when he says, I have heard these things. I have listened to them. So this is where he's getting involved with them. And the reason why I'm making a stop on verse 7, hold on here, is yes. Let's look at verse 8 first, and then we're going to jump. So I've come down to rescue them. So we're talking about what's on the cosmic mountain, and God's presence is coming down. It's a very common way of cultures talking at the time. So I've come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians. Not to mention, too, that going into Egypt is seen as going down into Egypt. But anyway, I've come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. Another Garden of Eden, basically. There's a land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites now live. Verse 14. So we just did 7. I've heard their sorrows. In verse 14, God replies to Moses, I am who I am. And the actual Hebrew here, so it's interesting to me. It definitely tickles my brain when you're looking at, let's go to Exodus. So in Exodus 3:14, so when God announces his name, what is his name in English? Like when you actually, I'm just going here because of that. What is his name in, how would you say it? His name as written in the Bible?
Yahweh.
Yahweh, yeah, exactly, yeah, Yahweh. But wait a second, let's zoom in here. This is his name, actually. It's Ehyeh, Asher Ehyeh. And so what it actually can mean is I am who I am, yes. It also means I will be who I will be. Essentially it's like I am unchanging. I am the one who does not change. And then he goes, so You will say to the sons of Israel, Ehyeh has sent me to you. From this point on, he's referred to it as Yahweh, which is the third person singular version of this, the he version. But his actual name is Ehyeh, I am, or I will be. And then the Asher is kind of like a relative pronoun. It means who. Yeah, who is really perfect for this. And then Ehyeh. And it's interesting because most people think his name is Yahweh, and it is. But when he declares himself to Moses, it's not that. And it's to me, it's just fascinating. Now, all right, let's see where we can go in the next 10 minutes or so. So, oh no, it would be 15 minutes. We've got 15 minutes. Okay. So, all right, guys. So that was the note that is verse 14. And verse 18, the elders of Israel will accept your message. Then you and the elders must go to the king of Egypt and tell him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, and this here would have been Yahweh, I believe. I'm just making triple sure that that's how it's being said. Yep, Yahweh. Yep, exactly. So now he is referring to himself. So God himself is referring to himself as Yahweh. And that's big here. Anyway, so in 18, the elders of Israel will accept your message. The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. So please let us take how long of a day of a journey? A 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. And when you think of Jesus as being the ultimate sacrifice, how long was he serving as a sacrifice? But anyway, so and then verse 21. And I will cause the Egyptians to look favorably on you. So, okay, let's go back to verse 7. So let's just see, I'm not sitting here, or we're talking about certain things here. Anyway. And actually, I'll add verse 12 just for fun. So, verse 7, then the Lord told him, I've certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I've heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. Verse 12, God answered, I will be with you. And this is your sign that I'm the one who has sent. Oh, I'm sorry, that I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you'll worship God at this very mountain. Verse 14, God replied to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Verse 21, and I will cause the Egyptians to look favorably upon you. They will give you gifts when you go, so you will not leave them empty-handed. It's interesting that these verses line up in just that way. So you can get like the overall concept of that very chapter with those 4 verses.
Yeah. What? I think, look at the beginning of verse 18.
Yes. Yes, what about it? The elders of Israel will
then they will heed your voice.
Yes. Good. Oh, I did not hear that one. Then they will listen to you. Yes. And not to mention, too, that when they see God's presence, and then when he comes down from the mountain and his face is glowing, they could see him. Yes, you're absolutely good. I missed that part. But this is interesting to me. All of this. Now, when you look at the whole chapter, there are sections of that chapter that would not apply to the story of this chapter. So it's interesting that 7, 12, 14, and 21 say these things. And then you have 18 that talks about listening to the voice. But, listening to voices. But anyway, all right. Chapter 4. Verse 3. Oh, wait, no. Okay, yeah, verse 3. Yeah, just making sure we're doing this right. Chapter 4, verse 3. I'm excited. So he casts the staff. Not to mention, it's interesting that it's verse 3. Anyway, it became a what? Nahosh. And that's the Nahosh, which means a snake. Really means a snake. It was a Nahosh that appeared in the Garden of Eden. Cool? Got that? We'll come back to that. So remember, it's an N, like an H, and an S. And it will change when they actually appear before Pharaoh. But this is a preview of coming attractions. We'll just leave it there for now. So, all right. So Nahosh is the word for snake. Verse 10, verses 10 to 14. But Moses pleaded with the Lord, "Oh Lord, I'm not very good with words. I never have been, and never have been, and I'm not now, even though you've spoken to me. I get tongue-tied and my words get tangled." Then the Lord asked Moses, "That's a obvious response. Who makes a person's mouth? Who decides whether people speak or do not speak, hear or do not hear?" This one I picked up on. Hear, speak or do not speak, hear or do not hear, see or do not see. Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will be with you as you speak, and I will instruct you in what to say. But Moses again pleaded, "Lord, please send anyone else." And the Lord became angry with Moses. I love it. It's like, so this here is like, he started to get on God's nerves at that point. It's like, dude, like, come on. I love his response. "All right," he said, "what about your brother, Aaron the Levite? I know he speaks well." Yes, that's the point. He loves to make words. And think about it later when Moses comes out and says, "What happened?" I just told him this and it came out and bam, he speaks. In that respect, he speaks what he wants to speak versus speaking the words like a prophet. But anyway, I know he speaks well, and look, he's on his way to meet you now. He'll be delighted to see you. Anyway, it's really cool that when you look at it from a different light. But anyway, verse 20. Oh, not to mention that Aaron is mentioned in verse 14. Does anything happen in 7 minutes? Oh, yeah. Okay, so I didn't always include the ones because sometimes I thought it was a bit of a stretch. But you can say in verse 3, it was talking about the staff. In verse 7, it was talking about the hand and the cloak. And then in verse 14, you got Aaron being involved here. And then in verse 12, it's talking about, now go, I'll be with you. But I'm just trying to stay on to err on the side of caution when it comes to me saying, well, this is particularly, that verse is definitely
I think it's interesting here in 14. It says, "So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses." That is the first time in the Bible that God was angry.
Not to mention how you say anger here. I believe it says the word knows. Just making sure. I forgot to mention that. Well, it says he was angry. He was getting annoyed, or like that. Yep, his nose. Yep.
Yeah, he had a hot nose.
Yep. So his nose got burny. His nose began to burn. Yep. Yep. Oh, I didn't share it with you. I'll share it with you. You can see it. I'll share it with you. So it was kindled off. Yeah, the anger. So, yeah,
it's interesting because I think it's interesting because when God gets angry, usually it's with his own people that know better about things, and not necessarily those that are
Yeah, and I think
Gentiles or whatever.
Moses is made here as a type of character that has his own problems.
Now,
yes,
anger was kindled. Is that a deliberate fire imagery, or
yes.
deliberate fire imagery?
What
or
it says, it is an idiom. It means his nose burned, and it basically says that when you get angry, your nose gets hot. Okay. It burns, and we're just talking about a burning bush as well. Interesting. But it's interesting that God's fire is, or his wrath is considered a patient one that takes a long time to get inside. But here it was saying the Lord kind of got ticked off at Moses because it's like, dude, I am literally coming to you in the form of a bush that's not burning up, and yet you're like, how can this possibly happen? Like, can I not, like, dictate who speaks and who sees and who hears? And he goes, yeah, but please, anyone else. I was like, okay, whatever. What about that guy, Aaron? Like, your brother is like,
yeah, it was basically, he just got hot with him. Instead of, like, God the consuming fire, he just...
The same language is being used. Yeah, it's an idiom for anger. Okay. Whenever you say someone gets angry, it's their nose gets hot. Mm-hmm. But anyway, yeah, that's an interesting idiom. Real quick here. Hold on, I got lost. Okay, verses 20 to 26. So Moses took his wife and son, put them on the donkey, and headed back to the land of Egypt. In his hand, he carried the staff of God. Interesting. Because didn't God say, what's that in your hand? The staff. Throw it on the ground. But now it's the staff of God. Hold on a second. Whose staff was it to begin with? Moses'. But now it's the staff of God. And Moses comes down from Sinai with a glowing face, just like God, right? Oh, and God said, I'll make you look like a god to Pharaoh. So, I'm not lying here. When Moses is being depicted as a god of sorts, like basically God has elevated him to an Elohim. So, like, he's doing this. And it's clear he's doing this. Anyway, so verses 20 to 26. Okay. And the Lord told Moses, when you arrive back in Egypt, go to Pharaoh and perform all the miracles I've empowered you to do. Remember, in Genesis 1, God creates the heavens and the earth, and he fills the stars and the sun and the moon in the heavens. And he gives them the power to rule over the day and to rule over the night. So he's doing the same thing to Moses. But I will harden his heart so he will refuse to let the people go. Then you will tell him, this is what the Lord says, Israel is my firstborn son. Now, when it says that I will harden his heart, it's still, I've had this opinion for a while, and it seems to be held up in my studies here, is that he's not directly hardening his heart. It seems as if more like God himself just forces Pharaoh to harden his heart. Like basically, it's like, have you ever mentioned God to someone and they just instantly shut down? That's what in my opinion, that's what it is. It's like just the fact that I am, will harden Pharaoh's heart. It does seem that way to me. I've heard arguments, the opposite spectrum is that Pharaoh was already going down that road, so God just pushed him a little bit further. It doesn't seem that way to me. It really doesn't. It's just like, because as soon as Pharaoh hears about God, he goes, who is this God? And so it's a similar thing is like if I were to come across him and just start talking about Christ, sometimes it just turns people off. Similar when it comes to Pharaoh. Anyway, then you will tell him, this is what the Lord says, Israel is my firstborn son. I commanded you, let my son go so he can worship me, but since you have refused, I will now kill your firstborn son. This is a battle of the gods here. So this is really Pharaoh, like a god in his own right, is facing off against Moses, a god in his own right, and the two are going head to head with the whole situation. And this is why when Moses throws down the staff, and then you have Pharaoh's servant throwing down the staff, it's basically talking about two gods fighting. So anyway.
Well, I kind of wonder in that, I'm having a delayed reaction here with this, but that I will harden his heart.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, this may sound like a stretch, but I'm just wondering if at some point, I'm just thinking out loud, so I'm not even asking for an opinion, I'm just kind of thinking out loud that when he says, I will harden his heart, that God knows how we'll react or he can, generally in any given situation. And the things that Moses told Pharaoh were designed to instigate.
I can see that. Because
and his back would automatically be up on that.
Remember David? I'm reading that book right now, and I'm going through like similar things. And remember David with the ephod?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, if I go down to this situation, will I be delivered into the hands of Saul? And God says yes. So David does the opposite. So God knows the ins and the outs of a certain decision. So when he presents these words to Moses and Moses utters them, I can totally see.
Yeah,
that's
Pharaoh's back would have just come right up on that. Because he was God. I mean, Pharaoh was God, and here's this other God telling him what's what. And so I'm just wondering if that's what he means by I will harden his heart, because when he detects my word here, his heart's going to harden.
Yeah, because this is a God sitting on a throne, being what's the word? Poked in the belly, I guess you could say, by another god, and he doesn't like it.
Mm-hmm. In Pharaoh's viewpoint, that was he was
not just Pharaoh's viewpoint, even the Bible's viewpoint.
Oh yeah.
Pharaoh is seen as a god. Do not get me wrong. I'm not saying that Pharaoh is not really a no. According to the Bible, Pharaoh's a god. And this is like the clash of gods here, and you have the Creator God and you have the Pharaoh God not submitting to the Elohim of Elohim's authority here, even though the Elohim of Elohim has granted that authority to him, he's taken it too far. So God is taking it back, and Pharaoh says no. Essentially, is how the Bible is playing this out.
Again, I'll go back to the quote from that stupid movie where Cleopatra says,
"Oh yeah,
I am Isis, and I'm worshipped by millions who believe it."
Right, absolutely. Mm-hmm. No, yeah, too, and it comes into play too with Baal, like the people who worship Baal cutting themselves. The Bible's not saying that Baal doesn't exist. It is saying, though, that what they're doing is, we'll get into that later, but the Hebrew Scriptures do absolutely say that other gods exist because God created them. That's what it's saying.
Right. Right. I'm not denying that. Yeah. I'm just saying that.
Oh, no, I'm just emphasizing the point.
That God knew, though, that when he poked at Pharaoh, there was going to be this reaction. So just the existence of God in Pharaoh's presence would harden his heart.
Right, exactly. I have no doubt with that. I do believe that's what it's saying.
My 2 cents here is in verse 27. He says to Moses, "And you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn, is my son, my firstborn. So you shall say to him, let my son go, and he may serve me. But if you refuse to let him go, indeed, I will kill your firstborn." Say that to just a regular king, and see if he's going to be on your, say, "Oh, sure, we'll let you go. Don't worry about it."
Right.
And that would harden your heart, like boom. Just ask, putting that quote unquote request in.
Yeah, I don't think it would go a long way towards softening his heart.
No. Your question. Yeah, I mean, think about it. Like, what leader of what president or prime minister or king of the modern world would take a liking to that type of language? Some Joe Schmo? Well, not Joe Schmo, because Moses was part of that line. But imagine being confronted like that from, let's just say the president of the United States were confronted by just a representative of some sort. It was something like that. He was a person of authority. But
they're just some citizen out there. Right. Just somebody he doesn't even know who he is, basically, Who are you?
You, Moses.
That's what I was just going to say. Yeah.
So imagine it's like a senator confronting the president or something like that, and basically saying, "I'm going to overthrow you." But that the senator isn't actually talking. You have some secretary of the senator going up to the president saying, is going to take over you.
Yeah, Moses has been brought up as a prince of Egypt.
Right. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say the prince.
No, an adopted family member.
Right. Yeah, yeah. High level.
Yeah, but he was respected as a prince in Egypt.
Mm-hmm. No, he had high level authority.
Yeah.
But anyway, so where it says, on the way to Egypt, at a place where Moses and his family had stopped for the night, the Lord confronted him and was about to kill him. Well, that took a quick turn. And it was talking about the whole circumcision here. It's like, I'm sorry, in my opinion, it's like God didn't like outright say it's because you didn't get circumcised. It's so funny that a foreigner did the circumcision maneuver, and he was a naturally born Hebrew. And it's interesting that there's that you are a bridegroom of blood to me. So,
well, what I think it's interesting too is that it never came up, and all of a sudden that was an issue.
Right, it's just that it's true. Yeah.
And no narrative of why it became an issue. And Moses, who was an Egyptian, was he even circumcised? He must have been circumcised because he was 3 months old.
When God confronted him, what verse was that?
What?
But when God confronted him, what verse was that?
24, I think. No, wait.
Interesting. It was 24.
Yeah, so what about it?
It's out of the blue, isn't it? That particular verse, right? It's like, I will now kill your firstborn son.
Oh, no, that was in 23. That was in 23, and then it came to pass on the...
No, and then the tide shifts suddenly in verse 24.
Right.
But then you have, but I'll say this, though, about the firstborn thing. This is going back to the Abrahamic covenant with, like, it was a mark of the firstborn, that type of, actually all males had to go through that. But it's interesting that you have this sort of, if you have the two gods going at it, and then all of a sudden, just randomly in verse 24, 2 times 12, you have this thing coming up, that God's anger came up against him. And then you look at here where it says, it's really interesting to me that. But anyway. But anyway. So she says, now you're a bridegroom of blood, blah, blah, blah. Let me just see where I'm at here.
No, it's interesting, though, too, about this is, wasn't she the daughter of a priest of Midian who was a descendant of Abraham?
Yeah, but
and therefore, did he not circumcise all his
Abrahamic covenant. Yeah, she would have known potentially. Yeah, she would have potentially known. But it is interesting that Moses did. And it is interesting. Like it is an like this is getting we're entering interesting territory. I'm gonna have to wrap it up eventually. So any further comments before I start shutting things down here?
No, just as things are heating up, let's go ahead and shut it down.
Yeah, right. I really don't want to exceed.
My nose is burning. That's all.
This is let me tell you, this is where things really get spicy, and I really do like. If you think that what we just did in the past 4 chapters is interesting and weird imagery happening here, just wait until next week. It's like we're going to start looking at like weird verses happening and like different number plays and all craziness is happening. Let me quick preview of coming attractions. How many wonders did Moses give Pharaoh?
Well, I'm going to guess 10, but I don't know. 12. It might be more. Was it 12? Yeah, because he gave a couple of preludes, right?
No, 1 prelude and 1 postlude.
What?
So,
say again. You broke up.
1 prelude, 1 postlude.
In the water.
Oh, okay. You're talking about the crossing of the Red Sea.
destroying them. You have him throwing the staff down.
That would be kind of a sign.
And the staff doesn't become a snake. And then you have the postlude of when the water swallows him.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so there's 12.
That Moses' name is supposedly drawn from water. And it's really interesting words here.
Not to jump ahead or steal any thunder, but I think just something to think about, I think, this week. Didn't you tell me that snake was the sea serpent?
Yes.
How about the correlation between the first sign and the last sign?
Right. Yes. Where is the tannin? That it lives in a water. It's a sea dragon. Yeah, we're going to get into that. We're going to get into that.
I never thought that.
Yes.
It was the serpent and then the
yes.
water. Yeah.
Do you realize how long I've been holding on to this stuff? Yes. This is crazy.
On me, the first time and the last time.
And not to mention, so 10 plus 2 is 12. So that gets to the whole 12 tribes are being drawn out of the waters of chaos that are Egypt. So, with that, let's go ahead and give it to God on that one. This is going to be great. I can't wait till we get started. So, all right, let's give it to. Yes.
I was just sorry. I was trying to hit mute. Maybe you should calm down just a little bit, Joe.
Just a tad, but anyway. All right, let's go ahead and give it to him. God, we just thank you for this. This is awesome. I know we went a little bit over time today, but honestly, wow. This is really cool. Like, when you just get through Exodus, there's enough information in there, and then you get to Exodus, and it seems like every word is like smacking you in the face. It's really cool. This is so awesome to just be able to present things that I just came across today, looking at like the different number plays of like the plagues plus the signs plus like the whole sea serpent coming out of the chaos. It's so amazing. And this is so cool because when you look at where we play a part in this as well, like this is like a story of how you redeem us from the chaos that's all around us. And that we are the ones being drawn out. And how we are able to become like these bushes that burn. It's crazy, all the imagery. When you draw it all together, and it's all, I have never seen such evidence of you anywhere else. It's really amazing. And so, Father, we just come to you and just put ourselves before you and just ask your hand of peace upon all who watch, all who attend, for everyone. For just absolutely everyone, we just come to you thankful and just truly enjoying the wonders that these scriptures have to provide. Father, we just love you and thank you. And in the name of Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.